Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining another episode of the PM Learning Series. My name is Shivi. I'm the host of the show and also a PM lead at LinkedIn. Really glad to see many of you here. Please drop in the chat, introduce yourself, where you're joining us from. As many of you know, the PM Learning Series is a series of live streaming events where industry thought leaders and practitioners share their product career journeys, as well as lessons learned to inspire aspiring and current PM like you to level up your product career. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find the link in the event details tab to receive key takeaways and recaps from today's event, as well as future event updates. So today with me, I'm actually having a really, really special guest. Let me bring him up to the stream. Amit, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Shivy. Thanks for having me here. It's my first time doing the LinkedIn Live, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that's really great. And folks, make sure you shower Amit with your welcome. So please drop in the chat where you're joining us from. But in case if you don't know, Amit is the vice president of product at Microsoft Teams and GroupMe. Previously, Amit led the product team at Facebook and Meta for Newsfeed. Prior to that, you were the head of product for real-time communications at Google. And during your time at Google, you were instrumental in developing many products like Google Meets, Hangout, Dual, WebRTC, and many, many communication-related products. Before that, you were director of product at a startup that were acquired by Google. So obviously, again, your resume is full of acclaims. And most importantly, you seem to have a lot of expertise in communication and the space of future of work and productivity. So we'll dive into that in a moment. And let's say hi to some of the folks who are joining us. I can see the chat blowing up for folks from all over the world, like from Vancouver, Canada, from Germany. There are a lot of Canadians today from Stockholm, Redmond, Florida, Berlin, LA, Chicago, Jordan, India. Thank you so much. And for those joining from Florida, that's really special because I actually doing live streaming, not from my normal home space. I'm working from Florida today. So thank you so much for a lot of folks joining us. And especially for the European and Asian folks, it's kind of your dinner time. So thank you so much for joining us on a Friday.
Wow,
So,
you have
Amit,
quite an
without further
international
ado,
audience. I said you
this
have
is a
quite an
very global
international
community, right? Folks from Brazil,
Yes.
from Malaysia, Budapest, Delhi. All right. I think everybody's looking forward to learning from you, Amit. So I think for today's talk, folks, if you have questions for Amit, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll pick them out from time to time. We love to, answer your question and make sure this session is valuable and practical to all of you. And I mean, usually how I start is starting with a personal story, but I think I'm going to flip it this time. And we're going to start with the meat first, the business first, which is about generative AI in Microsoft Teams and how you implement it, what kind of mental models product managers should have around working with generative AI. And then we'll switch the focus. I know that you share a lot of hard-earned career lessons and wisdoms on LinkedIn. So we can then sort of go back to your personal journey and kind of anchor on that and with that. So I think we have a jam-packed value session, for today. So really excited about that. All right, I mean, why don't we start with, recently we've seen a lot of news, including some of the latest features coming from Microsoft around Copilot or integrating generative AI into Microsoft Teams. So tell us a little bit more about that, and we'll get to most excited about future of work and communication.
Yeah, so that it's great to see all of you. I hope I make this time valuable for everyone who's tuning in. Look, Teams, the product that I work on, is pretty much a communications and collaboration product, right? A lot of people who use Teams spend most of their working hours in the app because they're trying to get things done. And our early focus really is like, how do we take these AI capabilities and take some of that drudgery out of your daily work, right? When you're in meetings, what are the simple kind of capabilities we can build that make your meeting experience just that much more efficient? Can it automatically get action items out of that? Can it pull information? If you missed something, can you easily catch up? So that's an area of focus for us. A lot of times, people who use our products complain about information overload, right? There's a lot of things you're juggling at work. You're looking for context, and so wherever we can help you with just summarizing stuff, just bringing that information to your fingertips so that you can actually action as opposed to just looking for context. Those are the kind of capabilities we're building, right? And it's all under our brand of Copilot, our service across Microsoft, and that's what we've brought into teams. And our focus really is, how do you take productivity to the next level? Like, people who are using the product are actually using their intellect to solve the problems and not look for information, right? And then catch up. So that's been, so we have a Copilot in Teams meetings, we have it in your chat and all of the capabilities that you use, and that's what we're trying to get right.
That's amazing. So, what can you tell us a little bit about now that generative AI is coming into the picture? Everybody's talking about it. Both startups and incumbents are working to incorporate this technology into their either building new product, new experience, or into the existing product. What advice would you give product builders to think through how to best use this technology?
Yeah, no. So first, I'll start by saying, even I'm learning. We're all learning. It's fairly new, so it's not like I have a playbook that you can just like copy. But I'll tell you a couple of things that in my observation. One, there's a lot of fascination with the models and the foundational layer of AI. But the more I think about it, is the real challenge is how does that uniquely solve the problems? And so as a product manager, that's no different from really thinking deeply about user problems and kind of reimagining and solving them. I see a lot of focus on just the capabilities, and it's important to learn about those. But the creativity in the application layer, right? What can you do with that differently and solve a need? I think that's where the focus needs to be. And I think of this as, all of us have a bunch of Lego blocks that we have that we can put together to build something. And in this case, because the field and the area is developing so rapidly, it's like new blocks keep getting introduced. So while you have a set, something new comes in. So sometimes you build something and you have to reevaluate. Hey, there's a new piece in here. Can it do something better than that? So as PMs, focus on really what can you build out of these capabilities. But part of your energy also needs to be on what are the new pieces of Lego blocks that are being introduced. So it's a very unique, fascinating thing, because it's not like you can just learn it all and then go try to build it. You're constantly learning and applying it, and that makes it really interesting and challenging. So that's kind of how I think about it. One example I have, right? So when the smartphones came about, and uh, the GPS chips became really cheap, and every phone had a GPS chip. You know, that was very fascinating new capability, right? You had now location at a fingertip everywhere, following you in your pocket. And really the early kind of application of that was, how do you do better routing? Because now you can track the person as they're getting to their destination. But over time, like, really fascinating models came about. I mean, the Uber is an example of just taking that capability and really creating a new user behavior and a completely new way of transportation. And so that's kind of how I think about it, which is, you have all of these AI capabilities. Like, what are the net new things we can build that we hadn't imagined before? And I think if you have that mindset, you just start to focus more on the deep product skills of, like, what are the problems, how could I apply these, as opposed to spending all the time being fascinated with the models. And unless you're a ML or a data scientist, you really need to think about the application of that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think our community members, man, was saying that the focus need to be anchored on, again, solving the customer problem, right, in a creative way, rather than having the technology in search of a problem. I do have two follow-up questions from the community that I would love to ask you, Amit, as a follow-up. One is, sorry, what kind of use cases or projects should we be using AI, ML technology versus keeping it, from a non-AI perspective? Do you have a way to think about, what kind of use cases best suited for AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think one good starting point, if you have an application or service, is just looking at what kind of data do you already are privy to, right? Data on usage of your service, usage of your app, because that is the kind of the secret thing you have if you're in a vertical around healthcare or travel, whatever it is, the data you generate, what is the intelligence that can actually take the tasks that people do with your service, with your applications, and just reimagine that, because you have so much data around, that is really kind of the first place to start, right? And which is like, do you have assets that you can use to make your service that much better, right? So that's kind of one easy starting point. You can do that today, and you can just do an inventory of, like, what is the data you have, what is the intelligence you can clean out of that. I think the second thing I think about is, take kind of existing way of doing things, and can you reimagine them. Travel planning is my favorite example, right? Like, in some ways you can say it's a solved problem. Look at the kind of the global travel industry and amazing number of services that exist. But we all know, if you've planned a trip, it's still very laborious, right? Like, you're researching, you're finding the right price, there's so many reviews. All that data is there, and how can that be more intelligent? You can just reimagine some of these things from first principles, and try to innovate that way as well.
I love that. Personally, being a travel person, I love seeing how it's being used. One other follow up question, Amit, I wanted to ask from our community is the notion around, as individuals, what kind of skills and knowledge do you believe are most essential for people looking to pursue a great career in product management and working on product related to generative AI? And obviously, I think the $1 million question behind this is that we all know that people are suspecting that maybe AI will replace some of us in some number of years. So how do you think about career development in the age of AI?
Yeah, I think, look, I wish I had all answers to how how this is going to evolve in the future, right? We're all kind of part of shaping that. The one way I think about it is like, some of the inherent creativity that is required, right, to solve a problem, that is still a core skill. Like, that's a core skill in product management today, and that is something is going to be required for the foreseeable future, right? Like, is how do you take, um, how do you take a set of tools you have at your disposal to build something out of it, right? That part is, you know, stays constant. I'll give you an example, right? In the gaming industry, okay, leave AI for a side, but just take a parallel. There's so much development in capabilities that happens rapidly. Graphics chips, graphics rendering engines, like, there's a lot of base capability that gets better and better. But you still need creative game designers to build a game that's compelling, right? Just because the underlying technology is getting better does not mean, any game you put out there is something people want to play with. So, it's very similar, where, you can imagine, like, the underlying capabilities are getting better, but you still need that creativity to build a compelling game, to build a compelling product. At least that's kind of how I view it. Instead of really stressing about, what is it going to displace, if you think about this as new kind of tools that augment, um, and focus on the game design, focus on your product design, I think that's a good way to kind of approach this.
I love the creativity and just getting into kind of the human psychology. Folks are thanking us for addressing the $1 million question on the table. And I think earlier, Michael is also resonating with what you said about, hey, there's so much data, and the real principle for when to apply generative AI and how to apply is thinking about using first principle, how to make those data more intelligent, that works for you, that deliver a better customer experience. I know you mentioned that at the beginning of this talk that part one of this talk is focusing on the meat, right? Like generative AI, how to build it right, how to do it right. I think before we switch gears to talk about your personal career growth, which I think it's probably a lot more fascinating and a lot more up and downs and real lessons than some of the meats. But let's close it out by maybe very briefly. Are there any limitations or drawbacks that you see with generative AI, and what kind of responsibilities do you think PMs should withhold when building this kind of technology?
Definitely. I mean, there's so many things that we have to be careful about, right? Like, I mean, the kind of data you have, can determine the outcomes. There are real implications to fairness and inclusion. So, right, uh, it's not something you can trust blindly, right? Even in terms of how you build models, how you think about privacy, how you think about, which data you're using, and how you're partitioning that and making sure that access is something that's reliable and trustworthy. We capture a lot of these things in, at least at Microsoft. We have our AI standards that are published. We everything that we build, we go through reviews across these dimensions of fairness and inclusion and security. And so, I that is part of responsible kind of product development. I mean, the way we used to approach, building security and privacy. I do think this doing it responsibly. It's not something you can just pick and assume it's all great, right? Like you have to make sure that you're factoring in kind of these criteria as you're building these products.
Yeah, I just got another very interesting question that came out. I actually had that same personal question sometimes too. So, since a lot of this AI technology is sort of engineering R&D heavy, as a product manager, how do you see sort of the evolving role between like the product trio, right? Like even for design, for example, I see that there are a lot of rapid prototyping tools that came out. So the role between an eng, a PM, and design gets like a little bit not as clear, right? And with co-assist, maybe more PM can even start to write code. So what do you see the different roles of the product development team changing? And in terms of technology selection in particular is related to this question, like what role should PM play? Should we take a driver's seat? Should we take a back seat? How do you see that happening?
I'll answer in two parts. First is like as PMs, we have to be familiar with these tools. You don't have to be the expert, but you have to have the ability to just kind of play with it, tinker with it, learn about how it works. You know, Very similar to data science. You might have data scientists on your team. That does not absolve you as a PM from the work of pulling your own data and insights and understanding, how data works. It's very similar to that. In PMs, in some ways, that level of familiarity, like how does the design process work? What are the design tools? Your ability to quickly build some prototypes is important today when we work with design and data science. Is going to be as important when you work with AI folks as well, right? So I do think if all of us have to educate ourselves in some kind of basic degree of familiarity. But the thing I would challenge us is to our roles as PMs should be to push on what is possible. What can you dream of? And then give that challenge to your specialized AI team to see if they can help solve that, right? I don't think we are constrained by who does what. We are constrained by how we can reimagine things. Because if you have ideas that are just can change the trajectory of your product or your service or how users interact, bring that and then see what's possible together with your cross-discipline folks. So the constraint is not really like who does what and how much can be done. It's like, can you really think, push the envelope? And I think if you focus on that, you'll both work better with others on your team and also learn faster.
I love that. pushing the envelope, reimagine the future, because I think that's the special power. That's the superpower of the PM. What brings to the table? Can you dream bigger? Can you think bigger? All right. I mean, I think let's switch gears and focus the rest of the talk really on some of your career stories. I think I get to know you through some of your posts. Obviously, earlier I introduced you as being having this like amazing resume. You're VPs in Microsoft, you're product director at Facebook, you work at Google, your startups were the lucky ones that acquire. Like it's almost feel like you have this glamorous career. And everybody knows that a lot of us face say imposter syndrome, or sometimes in one of your posts you call it the career journey is not like linear and then trending upwards, right? It's going up and down, zigzagging. Can you maybe share, if you will, like a moment of maybe a little bit of vulnerability of like a low point in your career and how you kind of bounce back from it, and what are some important lessons you learned from it?
Yeah. Look, first I'll say, I mentioned this in one of my posts, that LinkedIn profiles can fool you, because when I put my journey together, it sounds a lot more glorious than it is, and it's not not the case. I'm sure most of you, I've done this long enough, you will accumulate some of these achievements as you go through your career. So it's nothing special, okay? And it's also, when I meant it's not linear, because it hasn't been. I have been stuck at a given level for a long time. I have had things that didn't work out my way. I've changed jobs. So it's never like, it's not like a fairy tale. It's like, very typical of what all of us go through. And the point I made about non-linear careers, what happens is, there are two things that I wanted to communicate with that. One is, when you're in school, your outcomes are directly proportional to your hard work, right? You work hard, you get good grades, and you get into the next class, right? Like you graduate, right? It's very linear. And you're very used to, for the early part of your life, feeling like everything is in your control. And all you need, and there's this very stepwise sequence on to your destination. But, professional career is very different. It's different in two ways. One is, it's not linear, because sometimes you have to take different routes. You might feel stuck. You might not have the right you role, or you're not interested in what you're doing, and you need to make those switch. So that's one. And second, not everything is in your control, right? We all know that. You might be in a company that was doing well at one point, and suddenly economic things change, and maybe there's restructuring, maybe your funding dries up. You might be in a stable company and you can get reorged, your manager leaves. So there are a lot of things that are not in your control. And so the dynamics of a career are very different. It's not linear, both because of things that can happen to you. So approaching it in a way, understanding that you'll have setbacks, and that you can at any point control what you have, but you cannot control what can happen to you, but you can respond to it in the right way. I think that's what I was trying to get across, because you know that's a mindset change, especially as you get early in mid-career. You have to make, you have to make, and be resilient to those kind of things. I was at Meta in my, like first year. I think I had like 9 managers changing. There was like a lot of chaos, and there's like a lot of reorgs and all happening. And it's tough, because you just like, how do you build any kind of rapport, right? That impacts your career trajectory, definitely. But it's going to happen. It happens to, if it's happening to you, you're not unique. It happens to a lot of us, because that's the nature of work. And your ability to kind of be zen, and you find your way through and keep working hard, that really is, to me, like the thing that I wanted to communicate when I said like careers are not linear. I think you lost your audio, Shaggy. Can you try now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. So sorry.
No worries.
Technical challenge. That means keeping it real. Um, all right. Amit, I think what you said really resonated because LinkedIn envy is very real. Um, and just earlier this week, I think some of you might heard that, for example, LinkedIn just lay off close to 700 people, and many of them are actually very close, dear and near to my heart because they were close partners that we work with. A lot of them are great people. They're not necessarily like low performers. They were let go, but like you said, sometimes things are out of your control. I think in one of your posts, you mentioned a concept of a catapult. Um, in the context of a career management, like how you bounce back and how you find that accelerating opportunities. So tell us a little bit more about that and sort of what's the story behind it. Let's say, besides being resilient, when do you seize that moment when it's your time to shine? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, what I meant by that was, sometimes you just have to take a step back to go ahead with, greater energy. And, this choice will come upon you many times in your career. What I mean by step back is it might seem like a step back. Maybe it's going and working on a smaller team and it's a riskier project, right? It might be that you're working on in a smaller company, in a startup, or you get a role. You were a manager with a large team, but now you've been asked to do something, which is like smaller team, but the learning opportunity in all of these cases could be something that propels you forward. And a lot of times we dismiss or are circumspect about capitalizing on these opportunities. And I really wanted to kind of say, hey, these might be the things that actually change the curve of your career, right? Because what might seem like a step down is actually you're learning a lot more in that role. And I did that. So look, I joined Microsoft straight out of school, and then I left to do a startup. And at that time, I was like calculating how many unvested stocks I have and what are all the benefits that I'm going to lose, because the startup I was going to, it was super early, it was less than 10 people. Um, they had none of that. They just had a promise of, if we make it, economically it might be worth it. And, at that time I was doing all these calculations. And what I realized was, like, what's the worst that'll happen? I lose some money, but I'm going to learn a lot. Um, and that's an example of, I felt like it actually turned out really great, and I learned so much that was invaluable, has been invaluable in my career. So those are the things that I talk about, right? Look out for those opportunities and don't dismiss them, because I meet a lot of, I mentor a lot of folks. This is like a question that always comes up. Oh, I have this role, but I have to take a one level cut. And I always ask people is, what are you going to learn in both those roles, right? And if your learning curve is going to be steeper, then you're not really taking a step back, because that's going to help you in the long run. So that's what I meant by that.
Yes. Amit, can you still hear me? Use your thumbs up. I'm going to try something to mute you as I speak so that we can try to solve some of the echoing and feedback. And I apologize for folks who are hearing that. So hopefully, when I watch the recording, yes, there will be a recording and replay. And make sure you also subscribe to our newsletter, which you get a written recap of key takeaways from today. And then as I try to watch the replay of the video, I can edit the video to make sure the sound still looks perfect and everybody can hear it from me as well as from Amit. And again, that also means that Amit is the key focus. So as long as you guys can hear him clearly, it's all good. So Amit, let's closing out with one of the um, I think one of the most memorable feedback posts that I read from you was uh, how you define success. This went through some of this moment, bouncing back from setbacks. Um, you instead of, I think, optimizing for money and status and title and comp, um, it what, as your career grows and as you shifted in your life stage, what's your mental model for thinking about success, and how should people, given now that you've been there, done that, like think about that? And great to hear. I think the echo's gone, so amazing. And thank you so much, Amit. I think the community is loving your perspective. So now I'm going to mute myself and unmute you.
Yeah, I have a very pragmatic view of this, right? Which is your definition of success will always change as you progress through your career, and that is okay. That is okay. That is completely reasonable. Um, there is this, a lot of people give this advice like, hey, you should, always optimize for the people you're working with. You know, that is the most important thing. And if you're starting out in your career, that advice doesn't make sense because A, you don't know any people in the industry, and B, you have no way to evaluate them, right? And so when you're starting out, you just want a good job at a good company with good compensation, and that's what you target. And as you get some experience, your aspiration might change, which is like I see a lot of like on my team and various folks who are at that cusp where they're like, I want to be a manager. I want to learn how to lead, or I want to go build a 0 to 1 and do a startup, right? So then it changes as you get to mid career, later career. Then when you've done some of these things, you've built a network, then you start to realize, hey, actually the people you work with is really important. And now you have the ability to seek those kind of people out, to seek those cultures out, right? And you have a better sense to how to assess them, and you start to optimizing for that. Um, so my point here was it's okay to go through that journey, and in my opinion, that is the most logical way to go through your journey. I don't like personally the cliched kind of advice like find your passion, follow your passion, and or you know build like your career based on the people you'll work with. Or, any of these like absolutes don't actually work. Everything is different based on the stage of your career, right? When you're starting out, you're like, I don't know what my passion is. I don't even know what it's to work like in a role like this, right? And so your career is a journey of discovery of your own aspirations, and just being very honest with yourself to say, hey, what are my values and what matters to me the most, and going seeking it out is a fairly reasonable thing. The only thing I caution is don't do um, you know be very ambitious in the long run, but be zen in the short run. And what I mean by that is, if you are constantly have angst around, okay, I need to do more, I need to get a promotion, I need to get this more, whatever it is, you're not going to be successful. There's some amount of patience and persistence you need, right, in order to kind of see things through. So those are the two things that I really wanted to call out. One, which is your definition of success is your definition of success, and so you get to define it, and you get to hit the mark or not. It's not a universal definition. It's not something that applies to everybody at every stage. But and so that's the one. And the second is, once you're aware of that, make sure you're not impatient to get there, right? Just because your success definition changes doesn't mean it comes to you easily, right? You still have to work at it. Um, I mean, those are the kind of two things I've learned, over self, as I reflect in my career. The one thing I feel I did at every point was I tried to just optimize for learning. And I'm not saying that money wasn't important to me, who I work with, what kind of role it is, but I always said like, hey, if I'm very comfortable in what I'm doing, that's a sure signal that I'm not going to grow, right? If in the week, like 100% of my work is something I can cruise through, or I was doing it like last month, last year, then that's a signal that you're not pushing yourself, and that's when you try to make change, uh, take on more, do a different role, do a different product, whatever. But those are the two things I have learned, how to think about these things, and so that's what I shared in that post, and you know share with your listeners.
Absolutely. I love how you're saying that success is unique to you, right? It's not universal, which I think it's actually really hard since when we grew up, like you said, in schools, your expectation was getting good grades, which was a very black and white, very clear rubric of what success is. Um, since this is a live show, I hate to put you on the spot, but what is your current definition of success? Why don't you share a little bit about your personal take on that?
Oh my God, that's a personal question. um, right now my success is like if I can balance my work and my life, honestly, right? Like I have two little kids, and um, I'm always striving to find that balance. Am I mindful when I'm with them, or am I distracted with like notifications and work? Am I spending enough time with them? To me, that's success, right? Because that is the most important thing in my life. And so, how I go about work, how efficient I am, how do I scale? It really comes from that. That's kind of like what I think about, because in these years, I don't want to lose out on them growing up. So, very different if you had asked me 10 years ago what mattered to me, but that's where I am in my life stage.
Yes, that makes sense. I just want to call out a couple of comments from the community that really resonated with what you said earlier when you were saying that, reimagining things, dream big, and having a good communication is really the secret formula between sort of the evolution of PM roles in the generative AI world. And again, like evaluating, pushing the envelope, right? Like coming up with new ideas. I think it really resonated with the community. And then, our lives is a series of pivot, right? Like thinking about that sort of non-linear path and capturing the catapults of moments in your career to accelerate and always optimize for learning. So I think those learnings really resonated with the community. And Amit, usually when we close out our PM Learning series, we have a tradition that we ask the guests for a series of lightning questions. You can answer in a minute or less. Are you up for the challenge?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right, drum roll. So, first question is PMs. One of the favorite question that we like to debate or ask at an interview is what is your current most favorite product and why?
It has to be Chat GPT. I mean, I can't think of it. I'm sure it's for a lot of you as well. It's a product that I felt like opened doors to a whole new world, right? That's what we're talking about in the early part of our segment. So love it. Love playing with it.
I do also really like ChatGPT and the simplicity of the layout. I think they did also do a really good job lately showing the different prompts of how you can use that tool so that it doesn't rely on the onerous of the user to come up with like, oh, what can I use this for? But it really gives it a hint. So simplicity and really just the magical power of that. Second question is, who would you consider as your most influential sort of product role model that has played a big role in your product career?
Hmm. Honestly, I don't think I have one person. I have tried to learn different things from different folks, and I've in my career I've been fortunate enough to see some incredible product leaders. Um, some of them were really good communicators. Some of them were really good at how they managed their teams and partnered with others. So I've kind of tried to pick on different things that I thought people were strong at and learn from that. And it's not just leaders. I learn from people who are just starting out. There are folks on my team who are, I don't know, 2 years into their career, and they bring about such a different way of thinking about certain things. So I learn from that. I'm just like constantly trying to absorb, some good stuff from others. That's kind of how I look at it.
I love that too. Learning from multiple sources. I think it's if I were to take away, that would be the key one. Um, what would be one piece of sort of advice or resources you like to share with folks? I think earlier you mentioned about. I'm going to tweak this question from the community a little bit, and then you can anchor on your final piece of advice, probably around this. Your personal definition of success is sort of being able to manage this balance, driving this mindfulness, being present, being patient, like you said, in the moment while ambitious in the long run. Do you have like specific things that you do to help you balance that?
Um, I use this exercise of like zooming out and zooming in, you know. And when I zoom, once in a while, you just kind of have to find your place in the world, right? And you might be like struggling with some problems and stuff. And I zoom out and I look at like how lucky we are, how lucky I am to get to do what I do, right? Like if you look at our planet, look at the problems we have, humanitarian, climate, wars, everything that people struggle with. I was reading this WHO stat, like 3 billion people don't have access to drinking water, right? And just you look, when you zoom out and you look at these things, and then you zoom back in, and you're like, wow, my problems are not really, you know, pale in comparison to what people go through. I just have to get together with a group of people and build software, right? And so that's kind of how I think about Zen is like, really finding your place and really sizing your problems correctly, and being grateful to what you get to do, right? Because a lot of people don't. Um, so that's one. And then the second, in terms of just, I think the balancing work life, I use a lot of hacks, productivity hacks. Um, you know, Maybe I should make a list of those and send like everything. I have a, you know, um, do not disturb kind of time, which is my kids' time. I'm an early riser. I try to get a lot of the stuff done between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. before the daily work starts. So I've developed a bunch of these habits to kind of free up my time, when I need to, but still be effective.
I love that. I would love to read like a future LinkedIn post on productivity hacks from Amit. Those posts are actually usually very popular among LinkedIn posts. I have a couple of those too. But thank you so much for joining us today. I think the community is getting a lot of value out of it. Karen's enjoying, how to work with challenges and being present, and some a lot of great pointers here. Um, Thank you so much, Amit, again for joining us, and for folks. Apologize for earlier, they were echoing. And again, I'll make sure the replays do not have those. And then, in case you want to read a recap of the key takeaway from today's session, make sure you visit the event details tab. There's a link to subscribe to the newsletter. We have over 50,000, close to 50,000 members globally subscribing to the newsletter and learning from us. So don't miss out. And thank you again, Amit, uh, for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge about building generative AI product, future of work and communication, and all the career lessons, which I think transcends a lot of these technologies. And I hope folks enjoying as much as I do, learning from you. And thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Shaggy. This was great. Thank you.
All right. And see many of you next Friday. Have a great weekend.